This one's about a 30-year-old woman. We'll call her Irene. Now, Irene considered herself to be pretty badass. It's not that she was reckless or rude, although Irene did have a mouth on her. It's just that nothing ruffled Irene. At least, not until that night. The night in question, Irene and her pal Nita were at Irene's, watching old black and white movies from the Golden Age. Irene's place is a small studio-type apartment off the back of a larger house. Her mother owns the larger house, but she doesn't live there. She rents it out. But on this night, she was between tenants, so the house was empty. At around midnight, Nita said it was time for her to go. They'd had a great evening of fun, laughter, old movies, and some wine. Two best friends enjoying themselves. They said their goodnights and Irene started getting ready for bed. Her tiny apartment has a gorgeous picture window that looks out into the backyard. In sunlight, the yard is quite picturesque. Beautiful trees, lovely flowers. But at night, the entire yard is bathed in pitch blackness. You literally can't even see the tree line. As Irene lay down for the night, her cell phone hummed. She saw Nita's face in the window and figured she was calling to let her know she was home safe. Irene answered, but instead of Nita, there was silence on the other end of the line, and not just silence. There was this little crackly static in the line, and then the line went dead. Irene called her right back a few times, but each time it went straight to voicemail. If she were someone else, she would have been worried. But the badass in Irene said, she's fine, she's home, we'll talk in the morning. So she lay back down and turned off the lights, bathing her little place in total darkness. It didn't take long for her to drift off to sleep because she'd had a lot of wine. She was awakened by the soft humming of her phone on the pillow. It was Nita's face on the screen, so she answered. "Nita, girl," she said, "I'm so glad you called me back. You had me worried." Again, there was no response, just that same crackly static she'd heard earlier. And then a soft, girly voice said, "Hello." The phone slipped from Irene's hand and dropped onto the bed as a jolt of fear rocketed through her. A cold chill snaked up the back of her neck. That was not Nita's voice on the phone. Hands trembling, Irene picked up the phone and held it to her ear. "Anita," she said. "Anita, is that you?" She waited several seconds listening through that gosh darn static. And then the voice said, "No, it's me." So there she sat in pitch blackness, hands trembling like a puppy dog in a thunderstorm. Yet as frightened as she was also badass. So she gathered up her nerve. She tried telling herself, this is a joke. Nita is messing with my head. But she didn't believe that. She didn't believe that at all. "Who is this?" she demanded into the phone. But the demand was void of conviction because her voice was trembling. And then through the static, the voice on the other end declared, "You owe me." And then again the line went dead. She tried reasoning away what was happening. It just wasn't adding up. She tried calling Nita again, but instead of ringing, there was that static in the line. She tried calling her mother. She tried calling another friend. But each time she tried, she was greeted by that weird, crackly static. And so she sat there, rocking back and forth in the inky darkness, her mind reeling. The next thing she knew, her phone was humming on her pillow next to her. She opened her eyes to broad daylight. She couldn't believe it was morning, that she'd somehow slept through the night. It had to be the wine that knocked her out. Irene was grateful for that. She looked over and saw Nita's face in the screen. A tiny shudder floated through her belly as the terror of the previous night pushed its way into her consciousness. She answered cautiously. Hello? Nita replied, Hi, I just wanted you to know I had a great time last night. I should have called when I got home, but I was blitzed from the wine and fell right to sleep. Glad you're home safe. I had a good time too, Irene replied, totally not sounding like herself. She hung up from Nita and sat there staring at her phone, wondering if the events of the previous night actually occurred. Or had she fallen asleep in some wine-soaked stupor and dreamt the whole thing? Because, truth be told, she recognized the voice on the other end of the phone that night. She recognized it from a long time ago. It brought back memories she'd been trying to forget. That day, Irene went to the phone store and bought a new phone. She changed her number, too, and only gave the new number to her mother and a few close friends. Several days passed, and just when she was starting to believe she'd imagined the whole thing, she was awakened out of a deep sleep. When she looked over at the phone, the happy, smiling face of a 14-year-old girl was in the window. She knew this girl, and knew that that was impossible. Irene decided to let the call go to voicemail, but it didn't. The phone continued to hum, the humming seeming louder and louder, as if the phone was saying, "You better answer me." And eventually, she did. "What do you want?" Irene blurted into the phone. And through the crackly static, the voice again said, "You owe me? I don't owe you nothing. You're dead." Irene said this, hoping addressing the truth of the matter would set her free. It did not. The voice on the other end began repeating over and over, "You owe me. You owe me. You owe me." Eventually, Irene turned the phone off, and that put an end to it. For a while. From that day on, Irene only turned the phone on to use it. And as soon as she was finished, click, it was off again. But a seed had been planted. And as the days turned into weeks, the secret Irene was carrying, well, it weighed on her. Her mother noticed it, her friends did too. Was she sick? Was she getting enough sleep? Was she on drugs? Irene told them there was nothing to worry about. But with each passing day, she seemed to be growing older and less joyful and thinner. Meanwhile, Irene waited for her phone, still turned off, to ring again, as she knew it would. And then one night, the phone tucked away in her bureau drawer began to hum. You see, Irene had accepted that this was something she was going to have to deal with head on. She answered, and in a voice as calm as a glass-topped lake, Irene asked, "What do you want?" Through the crackly static, the voice replied, "Retribution." They called it Suicide Bridge because legend has it that a long time ago, a young man jilted by his lover jumped off that bridge, plummeting to his death on the rocks below. That myth had a life of its own in Irene's little town, as every year, high school boys approaching graduation, all hopped up on Red Bull and testosterone, made the trek to Suicide Bridge and leapt into the river below. It was a yearly ritual, a rite of passage, and while the town's elders forbid it and law enforcement tried to stop it, nothing could. That ritual had a life of its own. 16 years ago, 3 young girls in the throes of puberty made their own late-night trek up to Suicide Bridge. The girls had been hankering for something that would separate them from the pack, make them special among their peers, and they had convinced themselves that this was it. Jumping off the bridge into the river was something only boys did. This would get them noticed. The girls stood lined up on the railing of the bridge, all giggles and holding hands. Nita went first. She jumped into the river below. "Come on down," she hollered up. Now it was Irene and the other girl's turn. They held hands, vowing to jump together and seal their friendship for life. As they counted down, 4, 3, 2, Irene pushed the girl. And since she didn't have her balance, well, the poor thing missed the water altogether. But here's where it gets sticky. Irene never planned to jump because, you see, Irene can't swim. While on the outside, she was all big talk and badassery. After all, this was her idea. On the inside, Irene was a frightened child, hiding behind her boastfulness. The tragic incident galvanized Irene and Nita, bonding them even closer. But it was a false bond, because Irene held close to her secret. "Retribution," the voice repeated through the crackly static. "It was an accident," Irene declared, and in a sense it was. But the voice repeated, "You owe me." Irene decided then and there she owed nothing to this disembodied voice in the darkness. But as the days and weeks passed, Irene developed an itch. Was it a nervous itch, rash, guilt? I couldn't tell you. An itch started on the inside of her left forearm. But before Irene knew it, she'd scratched away all the upper layer of skin, revealing the raw pink flesh beneath. Tiny spotlets of blood appeared like mist on the wound. It eventually got infected and began to secrete a yellowish, pus-like ooze. From there, the itch moved on to her thigh. Irene covered the unsightly lack of flesh, the raw redness, and the ooze on her arms and legs with bandages and extra layers of clothing. But then the itch moved to her face, and the only way to combat that was to stay inside, hidden away from the world she once loved being a part of. No job, no boyfriends, no friends. It was a horrible, unbearable form of existence. After months of living in her fresh hell, Irene awoke one morning with an idea. It came to her in the night that there could be a way out of her horror show. It was risky, but as time passed, Irene became more willing to take the risk. Now all that was left to do was to wait. And then one night, her phone hummed again. Irene answered the call and uttered one word. She said, "Okay." It was midnight when Irene made her way up onto Suicide Bridge. She hadn't gone near the place since the incident. The night air was balmy, the moon was near full, the breeze was mellow. It could have been a beautiful night, but this night possessed no joy for Irene. She approached this night with conviction. She climbed up onto the railing just as she and her friends had done many years ago. She recalled the laughter, the giggling, the sense of adventure, the joy of it all. But that was a long time ago. Irene looked down into the blackness because she could not see the water nor the jagged shoreline below. Consider yourself paid, Irene spoke the words loudly. They echoed into the still of the night. 4, 3, 2, and she jumped. As Irene plummeted downwards towards an uncertain future, she realized you can't run from your past. It will always catch up with you, even if it has to track you down to an isolated bridge along the winding path of the crossroads.